Good evening, everybody. This is a meeting of the Town of Greenwich Planning and Zoning Commission being held virtually on Wednesday, oh, you remembered, great, Bianca. Wednesday, January 11th. We only have one item on our agenda. It is a discussion item, a regular meeting discussion item for Greenwich American Inc. for a pre-application review at 1 American Lane in the BEX zone. This is currently proposed to be, it still says 456 units, but I believe it is now down to 309. Our seated alternate this evening, seated for Mr. Levy, will be Mr. Wells. And Mr. Hegney, when we last saw you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, could I just?
Yes, sir.
A very short speech. Because of the work that I and other members of the Affordable Housing Trust have done on this application, I'm going to recuse myself from participating on behalf of P&Z for this matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barilak. Mr. Hegney, when we last saw you, you were discussing three or four open items that you wanted to explore with the commission. And it was the end of a long night and we didn't feel we were doing your application justice. And we asked you to come for a separate meeting so that we could fully explore each of those items. Is that still your plan to go forth? You have 4 questions that you wanted to discuss with us?
Yes, I have 4 separate items that I would like to go over with the commission that were in my letter to you last week. And I would like to go through and discuss each one of them separately and then move on to the next one rather than having me present all 4 at once and then having a discussion, because I want to sort of keep them as separate topics, because as we go through, they do tie together. But I'm looking to do them in an order that I think makes some sense. And if we could do it that way, I'd appreciate it.
Great, and it's also helpful for our limited attention span if you do one by one, or our ability to remember or something like that.
I do want everyone to be attentive. That would be great.
Great. So, okay, so we'll let you start with what you think the first item should be.
Thanks, and I do appreciate you setting up the separate meeting, because I think that this is one of those projects that does require more attention than others might. And it's a significant piece of property in town. I think it's a significant project for us to discuss. So thanks for setting this up. I hope over the last year that we've been discussing this, you've had a chance to visit the property. If you haven't, it's just a great site, and I think there's a lot of opportunity here to work with it. The 4 topics are the cluster home community design with the 309 units now, the proposed floor area limitation of 0.3, the height of 50 feet and 3.5 stories, and the proposed setback of 50 is a separate second issue. Third issue is using the approach of an overlay zone for the residential development on the site. And fourth is to discuss the proposed contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So those are the 4 separate topics that I'd like to go over. To start, Bianca, if you could bring up the presentation material. Sure. I don't have a lot on this. The second slide is just the GIS. We've been talking about it now for quite a while. So I know you all know where the property is. This is King Street, is actually in New York. The blue on the west side or the left of the property is the state line. And then the property immediately to the north, which is approximately 60 acres, is owned by IBM and is vacant. And then we have the Tamarack Country Club on the other side of 684, where the cursor is. And obviously you can't get here by other than going through New York. And there's a separate entrance for this site, American Lane, which is a 4-lane road and has a traffic light at the southern entrance on King Street and just a stop sign at the northern. That brings you in to the site. We have the 600,000 square foot office building with 3 levels of garages underneath. And up in the northern corner, the point, you can see that's where the, right there, yes. That's where the wastewater treatment plant is for the property. If we can go to the next slide, please. And I'll ask Eric Zambell from Granoff Architects, who's our project architect here, to go through the plan. We started with 456 units with the first plan we brought to you in April of last year. There were comments on location of the units and appropriateness around the office building and the density. We then came back with 348 units in June. There was questions on layout and a more open design. And that was in 348 units in 30 buildings. We now have 309 units in 55 buildings to bring the scale of the development down. And so I'd like Eric to go through this plan with you. So because it's the first time we've actually had an opportunity to discuss this particular layout. Eric, if you could walk the commission members through what we have here.
Certainly. Madam Chairman, members of the board, Eric Zambell from Granoff Architects. As Tom has put forth, we've gone through several iterations and worked with some marketing consultants with the client regarding use type or prototype for the different housing options and what would be best for this site, as well as provide a certain level of density that is required. So what you'll see in this plan currently is 4 different prototypes, and we created an enlarged legend based on a comment from our last meeting, and I'll just briefly kind of call this out just as we're before we go around the site. The orange or salmon color will be a attached 2 units townhouse. The more purple color will be 4 units attached to each other. And then that teal is 3 separate townhouses attached. And then the light blue is something that we're looking at for flats, and those are typically taking place where we have more topographic challenges. So we've set this up in neighborhoody types scenarios. And also areas around some green spaces and sort of creating courts or backyards. If we're looking at the south where we come in, this is where we get the biggest jump and change in topography. And that's where most of the flats would be, and that would be projects where we would like to do parking underneath and then have 3 levels of flats above those. And that's where we kind of get into the question of and the request for the 50 feet of height. That way, when we're having those essentially 3.5 floors, we're going to be working with our grade plane there, and we'll be trying to keep that down. But we also are thinking of these in potentially being a gabled modern townhouse type feel. So to be able to get that roof or that gable on those is why we're conscious of where the height will end up.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. Can you explain what exactly a flat is?
So a flat would be an apartment that is on a single floor. It's an elevator building. It's not a townhouse where you're going up multiple floors. It's more that traditional apartment feel, where you come into a lobby and then you go up and you disperse down in this particular case, what would likely be a double.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So we have those clustered together primarily on the south, and then as you come up through what we're calling this whole western band, or the sort of the top left corner of this, is we've been referring to it internally as the crescent and the north crescent. The crescent being everything above American Lane, and the north crescent being that area just north of west of American Lane, and then the north crescent being that area north of the Stone House, which you can is the gray building, the existing stone. I believe it's roughly 8,000 square feet or so that is existing on the site, and that's setting up the a potential spot for amenities, and it also sets up the that north crescent as really a nice, like almost town square around which those units circle around. But to go back to the entry on the south, we've created a couple of entries into here. We've created a street that loops around, occasionally getting some guest parking on, but all of these units we've done in sort of the more traditional single family mode, where we're anticipating parking garage, actual garages for each unit, and a driveway. So this is helping us to balance a little bit of our green in our cut and fill by doing it this way.
I like that.
And in some of our previous pre-app meetings, Ms. Alvin had mentioned that courtyard feel, and she specifically mentioned the Westport model, which I studied that a little bit, and that's micro, and that's a little tough to pull off. But
I watched Mr. Granoff flinch a little bit when I mentioned it at a different application, but that was the idea, to create the green space, because somehow there are a couple of things people tell us about apartment building, folks that don't want to do stairs, the strollers, where you're going to put the stroller.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to tote this. I think Mr. Zambell, don't you have young children?
Yeah, actually they're college age at this point.
There's college age, okay. But the strollers and having to deal with them on stairs and things like that. And since we're trying to attract at least a mix of population, so I like the way where you're going directionally with this. Okay, go ahead.
So we get the middle courtyard, or the long plaza. It's almost like, I think of it a little bit like the mall or Central Park, that you're building up around this this green spot that will be saving trees, but will also be used with landscape, be creating outdoor spaces and areas for families to enjoy a bigger backyard, as it were, because we're going to be providing individual terraces and backyard spaces off all these townhouses. And then there'll be the greater sort of separating strip that you get in some of these more the neo-urbanism or sort of that Westport model that we were looking at. So we have that, and then we have kind of the as we go up north of the Stone House into that north crescent, that's probably the flattest area on the site. So those will be relatively easy and be a simple spot to where we're able to make sure we're getting some of those more easily circulated houses that Ms. Alvin was talking about. We'll definitely be able to have minimal stairs there, have people drive right in, and not have any of that sort of issues that you sometimes get with the topography that we'll have lower, where there will be some steps to get in, and then we'll be addressing that either in the garage or someplace else to make it more convenient and more accessible and meeting our accessible requirements. We then have the area that is north of the Crescent or north of American Lane that abuts the IBM property. Again, the top of that is flat before it starts to recede down towards the what we have designated as the lake, or the sort of that man-made water that the existing commercial building kind of dams up, and it's really beautiful from their cafeteria that they have in that building. But so we have we go along the that property line which parallels the state line, and we set up the neighborhoods there. Those ones we get a little bit more space, so the backyards themselves, you know, typically get a little larger, and you know, that's you know, again, creating a little variety in our mix. And then lastly, we have on the what is the east side, but on the drawing is, you know, the bottom right, we have the picnic area, which is an existing picnic area that connects to the hiking trails that are present on the site, and those other sort of outdoor existing amenities that flow and allow you to make use of, you know, this 150 acres of wooded areas. Those, you know, again, kind of set up nicely around a shared commercial and residential spot, but it's well back, and we think it'll create a nice community feel, and that's kind of the gist of the general concept that we have here.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Yeski, I think you look like you're going to say something. Mr. Wells?
No, I've seen this. What's the issue? It's just zoning? He needs a total zoning text amendment? Or what specifically are they worried about?
Okay,
Assume
so
they get the zoning change. Are there
Okay.
issues within this project that still we have to deal with at this point?
okay, so Mr. Hegney, I think, would be the one to address that.
Yes, Mr. Yeski, what we're looking to get your reaction and feedback on is this kind of layout that we're proposing before we start actually designing these, is this a concept that that we should be continuing to pursue? Not that you find, you know, we're not looking for an approval tonight on any of this, but we want to know that at least that we're heading in the right direction. And if we're not, we want to know that before we go in and start doing
The
greater
zoning.
detail of plans.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
Let me react. How about that?
Absolutely.
Please.
I've seen a lot of these projects all over the country. I would still love to see if you looked at other options. I'm thinking California, I'm thinking Colorado, I'm thinking Florida. There's a lot of developments, including commercial, where they've done all kinds of things. And, you know, I don't have a library of them, but I was kind of hoping when we suggested this, that this goes way back, that you might have looked at some other layouts, and I mean, a major way, and some other things that could be different. Clearly, like Miss Albin wants cute little houses with white picket fences, and that may not be economically possible. This looks like a very dense project, which economically may make a lot of sense. But it you know, and maybe that's absolutely the best use. But I was kind of hoping at some point in the discussion, we'd hear about other options that you had looked at. Because to answer the question, is this good or is this the right direction? Yeah, it looks great, except I don't know what else could go on there. And it's a very unique space. And, you know, what comes to mind is this the densest thing you could do? Or when you look at other options, are there other more clever things you can do? And, you know, I don't know whether you have an answer for that, but we're kind of getting what you've got, but I'd love to see if there were major alternatives to this whole thing. And I've seen projects that incorporate more amenities for sure. Now that may be getting back to the land and the density and your economics, but there aren't a lot of amenities. There's open space, which is great. We love that. But one little picnic area, there's more than that because you get the easements to the conservation areas, the easements. It's going to have a more open field, but not a lot of amenities. Is there the Stone House, for example? Is that supposed to be like a community center or what? And what is sports courts? Is that the spaces between the two legs of the streets there? Are there going to be ball fields there or something? What is a sports court? So, I mean, I don't know. That's my initial reaction. To ask us, was this right? It's like, well, I don't know what the alternatives are, quite frankly.
Tom, do you want to address? Or?
Eric, why don't you address some of the specifics in terms of the layout and amenities?
So to answer the two quick ones that were direct there, the sports courts, that's essentially the equivalent of 2 tennis courts. We haven't fully worked through what that would be. Will that be, that could be 3 pickleball courts, a basketball court, or a tennis court and a couple of pickleball courts, and there's more green space that we can work with in that to up those amenities. The Stone House is something that we haven't landed on a final sort of program for that, but we have talked about it being like a clubhouse, or maybe there being a small cafe and other type of indoor amenity type spaces that can be used, whether there's a library, maybe some Zoom room type things that the neighborhood would be able to use. I would say that we haven't overly amenitized in a building perspective, because it might have been our first meeting that we talked about it. We had a small grocery store, but we've done a little research and we don't quite have the density for that in the neighborhood to really support that. And there seemed to be some pushback. At least I interpreted it as pushback from at least 1 or 2 members of the board that doing commercial up here would have been thought of negatively.
I don't think we were saying that, but I don't remember us saying that, but to be honest, in this age of everything getting delivered anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's even necessary for most people anymore.
Yeah, but
I don't.
a little supermarket is not what I meant by amenities. I was looking for more ball fields, fields.
Go.
I was looking for a pool. I was looking for a couple other, that's what I mean by amenities. When you look at these projects in other areas of the country, now I know it's weather dependent, but they sell it on amenities. This looks like an apartment complex. That's nice. I understand the economics, and that's one way to look at it, but I'm answering your question, Mr. Egney. What do you think? And that's what I think. Now, it may at the end of the day be the right thing to put on the site, but it's just a reaction. That's all.
With other projects that we've been involved with, typically the density gets up to around 500 units before that becomes a real viable option to really do the pools and those high-end amenities, or they need to be they can be less dense, but then it's really high-end luxury where you're talking something like the St. Regis down in Rye.
Yeah, well, the St. Regis is much more high-end than anything else we have in Greenwich, other than private homes. We have some private homes that are actually very high-end. But I don't know, it's just a reaction, that's all. Mr. Egney, you were going to add about other options, or you're going to go in that direction?
Well, one of the options we had, which we haven't brought to you, because I told Eric I didn't want to shock you at all. We did have 1,100 unit project.
Are we going that way? That's good.
Out here.
That's a good option.
I said we're not going to show them that one. So that's why you originally saw the 456, which we thought worked. And that's where we got the comments back, putting it in front of the office building really work. Putting it near the air handler on the south side of the office building doesn't work. And you really need to look at, how these are going to fit within the site. And then this comes out of the last iteration with the 348, where we're looking to create more green space around so that those light green ovals come community spaces, be it community gardens or areas to congregate, that you do have that more open space and create that sense of community. That's what we were looking for with this particular design.
Okay.
But we
Just
can
my
certainly
reaction,
look to
that's
see
all.
what else was out there around the country that might work better.
What about other commissioners? What do they think?
I
I-
think, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm assuming that the perceived market is dictating this design to a large degree. I mean, my own experience is strictly anecdotal, so it's difficult for me to opine specifically on the minutia of the design. But certainly, if there's the developer is looking to be successful with this and has cited some of the advantages, which made sense to me, that to whom this would appeal: families with children, empty nesters, the senior community, professional singles and couples, that lock and leaves notion, and low maintenance. All these things it seem to resonate, certainly, in the general sense. So I for one have trouble critiquing this with any great detail, but it seems to, if it's going to sell, that it seems like that would be great. I'm aware of there's a large area very nearby that gets some air traffic, and I assume that's going to be might be an issue for people, but that's not really our job. So, Nick, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's interesting. I appreciate that there's no units that around the building, the existing office building, and that there's a reduction in the number of units. The cluster housing concept is laudable. I mean, it's not something that is unique to Greenwich. I mean, Greenwich Oaks, Place, Lion Farm, even down the Westchester side of the Belfair, those kind of things. It's things that we've seen before, although many years ago, but it's here. What I've found those others is that they seem more organic. That the driveways and around, the way that they've matured over the years with the in and amongst the trees, kind of gives them a unique character, where they're not so planned out. They're built on top of the rock, not into the rock. They've let the trees grow up and didn't cut down much that was there. The driveways in and around them, or more like paths around the buildings as opposed to boulevards following the faces of the buildings. As I see this, I kind of think more of a college campus where the buildings are very rigidly laid out. It's empty during the day. Everybody's off at their classes, and they come back, and it's just very straightforward. I would like to know more about this, the relationship of the property to the city conference center next to it. It seems that those buildings are right on top of the line, and if there's been any discussions with them as to the extent of the project and what's happening here.
Nick, are
And
you
also-
talking about IBM, or are you talking about the American Center?
The Citicorp Center out on King Street, between this property and King Street, there's that whole other development, a lot of buildings, and from what I'm seeing here, maybe the backs of some of these buildings are right on the property line. It's kind of hard to tell, that relationship, but have there been discussions with them? Is this part of the project? Is it a separate property owner? Or is it going to be disconnected from this? Because I guess right now there's a driveway that goes from one building to the stone house. One other thing I'd like to maybe Mr. Hagney can provide, the open area to the north. Is that under separate ownership, or is this part of this property owners?
It's
And what would
IBM. It's IBM owns it.
IBM owns that portion then?
Yeah, he said that a couple times.
Okay.
And I think we asked them if they have any plans, and the answer was no, not at this current time.
Mhm.
Maybe that's changed, because that would be another Greenwich development. And it's interesting, they have a road called American Lane that goes, it's huge, and it ends. Now, when I see that in Florida, that means there's another development coming. Now, that's the state line, right? So they just go circling around. Okay. But yeah, I didn't mean to answer for you, Mr. Hagney.
But your answer was correct, Mr. Miskey.
Gold Star.
Mhm. So that's IBM, but that's still under the BEX 50, isn't it?
Yes, that's a 60-acre vacant parcel owned by IBM that is within the BEX 50 zone.
So, and we'll get to this later, but in a sense then, that would actually also come under your text amendment. That would be qualified for your text amendment
Yeah.
in a weird way. Actually, the only thing is there was no office building there in 1968.
Right.
Okay.
So I had a couple comments. It just looking at it untrained eye, correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at the lower left, the bigger buildings are more closely, set on the plan to each other. And then when you go to the upper right, they're more, there's more spread around. There's more space, and there's smaller buildings. I'm wondering if we're sort of getting a economic segregation here, where the lower priced units are going to be lower left and the upper priced units are going to be upper right. I mean, I'd sort of, like to see more of a mixture there of all the different kinds instead of, segregating it. I mean, that's my assumption. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but you're getting a real uniformity down at the lower left, and also a density that you don't have on the upper right, and maybe, mix it up more rather than, segregated economically. And if I'm wrong, please let me know.
Mr. Zambell, could the unit mix be shaken up a little bit based on the topography issues that you mentioned?
Yeah, and we've sprinkled some of the what I call flats earlier, or the light blues, into certain spots, so that that does happen. Also, these in terms of the economics or how this might end up creating a distinction, we haven't really settled on the unit mix in these. If we end up with a 4-bedroom flat, that could be more expensive and more preferable than a 3-bedroom townhome to somebody. So I don't think that's necessarily in the cards. This is primarily about the topography, and kind of goes back to what Mr. Macri was talking about with how things might kind of have some level of organic, as though there's a reason due to the site that there's and they're coming out of this organically, and also to kind of speak to what Ms. Macri was talking about in terms of the rigidity of this, as well as the Citicorp. We haven't had an actual site plan given to us yet with topography. We've compiled this via different sites, and we have a very good idea of what's there. But we should have the site plan in the next few weeks from the civil engineers, And this will feel a little bit more organic when we start adjusting the roads and the pitches to that. We've done that a little bit here in terms of where the roads kind of cut in relative to the grades as we understand them. The previous schemes that you had looked at, the 340 plus and the 400, those were ones that were really working with the grade and the topography in such a way that they ran parallel to it in a way to reduce the main drives through there. It was more about creating driveways to units, but that was definitely a different model and more dense. So I would anticipate that you'll get a little bit more organic feel, similar to those models that you've mentioned on King Street, either Belfair or the new Kings, Kingsfield, I think.
Let me understand the light blue, let's call it the bottom here. Those are high rise, right? You're doing it because there's a cliff there. There's a steep slope of some sort. So you
I won't call them a high rise. I'll call them mid rise at best. They're only three stories of flats, right? So
well, we call 50-foot buildings 3.5 stories higher rise. This is Greenwich, not New York. But those are tiered down a hill or something, right? Because you have parking underneath. Is that the idea?
they run parallel with the topography so that so that you can create a parking underneath them.
Right. So it's on a slope, right?
There's a slope, so they'll be cut and fill.
Right. Well, yeah, the reason they're there is there must be a ridge line or something where that it's a natural way to bring cars into a lower level parking garage, but then build on top of it, that kind of thing, right? It's a tiered down the hill.
Right. Hold on a second. Ms. Steiger, can you zoom in to that triangle where the blue buildings are? Oops. Because there's grade elevations that are indicated on the drawing, so you can really get a sense of it. Yeah, right in there. Zoom in close if you can. The top is at 440. The bottom is at 370. So that's a pretty good drop of grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, that's where it comes into. We want to find a logical location to drive in and to create the nestle these things into that hillside so that the first floor is parking, but that's 50 to 75% below grade, and then the next floor, which is where you start to have your windows and need your natural light and your living space, those are done in a way that you can maximize the views on the ends and create the living units that way, so that then by the time you get up to 2 and 3, you're full, you're kind of in the trees, you're not in the hill, but you're in.
I get it. No, that's what I thought. I didn't see the grade lines. I couldn't see them before, but I figured that. So I get it. Okay.
And just to comment on what Eric was saying earlier, if we go to the next slide, it's a comparison. I'm at the number 5 slide, which is the next one after. This is a side-by-side comparison that we put together, showing how we went from really following the contour lines to looking at breaking up the long buildings into smaller pieces. That's why we had 30 buildings in the plan on the left, and we have 55 on the one on the right, even though we've taken out almost 40 units. So that's why we were looking at more of this cluster type development rather than having everything very linear. I didn't mean that to be a conversation stopper.
I know they're just thinking. Folks?
Well,
Yeah,
just go ahead, Peter.
I'm sorry. I'm sort of focused on that last comment. And you're saying that the one on the right, the most recent one, is less linear, but I see very straight lines, very linear design. And, I know exactly what Mr. McRae is talking about, and he's, I think, wishing for that more natural, almost haphazard design that seems to flow with the land, as opposed to a clearly cookie cutter design with lots of straight roadways and straight little houses all in a row. But go ahead, Arn. I'm just looking at this and thinking about it. Go ahead.
No, just since we had an open spot, just to comment, Mr. Hagney's letter that he submitted indicated there were studies done, this is a little bit off this topic, regarding adequacy of water and the capacity of the sewage treatment plant. Maybe I assume we're going to talk about it later. I just want to put a marker out there that, the object is not how much water there is and how much you're going to use. The object is how little water can you use, because water is a scarce resource. We're under drought conditions now here, and that may come again. So I have this idea of a giant straw in Northwest Connecticut, and then all the houses in backcountry, their wells run dry. Then secondly, in terms of the sewage treatment plant, it's much more than capacity. It's, what is the quality of the water coming out there? Is there an opportunity to use gray water, to use highly treated water to, irrigate the lawns? So clearly not tonight. Mr. Hagney did not want us to talk about it, but I just didn't want the assumption that because these studies have been provided that, we're not going to talk about the use of water or, the quality of the water coming out of the sewage treatment plant. Maybe we talk about it later, but that's just as important as the site plan to my mind. And then I also want to add, we have a lot of respect for Granite Architects. Rich Granite was on our call yesterday, has a commitment to sustainability, and you've done a number of projects. So as we get into it, we're really going to be looking for a high level of sustainability across this whole thing, because this is a major project. Again, probably not tonight, hopefully another night.
But Arn,
Thank
it
you.
might be helpful if you're thinking in terms of the zoning as well as the site plan, if you get a chance to share tonight what you have in mind. But we don't have
Yeah.
to do it right now. I think we're in a different place right now, but maybe
Okay.
later on you could do that.
Well, just give me a placeholder and I'll come back to it. Thank
Done.
you.
Okay. Anything else on this? Any more?
Yeah, I struggle with, because the question is what sells in the market, and we can't determine that. But I struggle with other options. For example, let me be blunt. Why not build another Lions Farms here? The difference is that they're standalone houses. Yeah, they're organic, but it's really a series of single family homes, spread around. It's been very successful, but the price range goes much higher than maybe some of these are envisioned to be. Don't know. I don't know that we're ever going to get down, and I guess it gets back to the trust fund and subsidies. But are any of these units going to be significantly below $1 million? I know that's not a question we're allowed to ask, right? But it could just come out that these are going to be a bunch of $1 million houses, and that's nice. But there are other options for the developer. Let's put it that way.
Well, they're declaring that they're trying to fill this or address a market need between the 1 million and 3 million, is the way I read it. Is
Well,
that right, Hagney?
Yes, Mr. Lowe. And I was just going to add, we did have a marketing study done. Our client did commission that. I've included just their executive summary in what I sent you last week. And the market demand seems to be in that $1 to $3 million range. When I've spoken to brokers in town, particularly Mark Pruner, who does the analysis of data for sales, the dearth of available houses for people to buy is mainly because people don't have a place to go and they still want to stay in town. And so this seems to be the market demand for downsizing and also opportunities for first-time buyers to come in and have a range of both design and price point. So that is where we're going, rather than the Lion Farm model, which is much more homogeneous.
Well, the buildings look similar, but it's a different concept.
It
Yeah,
has
and-
similarities in terms of they also have a townhouse part, and you know they're grouped homes, you know, so it's not, I don't think it's that far off. The lack of organic streets or you know the linearness and almost the campus feel that Mr. Macri had mentioned, maybe that's significantly different. But
It
there's
is
a
different. It is different.
there's a density at Lions Farm that we're not achieving here as well.
Mr.
I
Hegney,
mentioned that earlier, yeah.
Mr. Hegney, I got a kind of an issue. The market study talked about the issues as they relate to Greenwich real estate. And I find that a little odd for me because of the location of this project. And it's so separate from Greenwich. You know, it's a 10-minute ride from anything in a downtown area, closest downtown area. Would it be prudent for the market analysis, or would it have been prudent for the market analysis talk about actually the Armonk area, the Westchester area, as opposed to the Greenwich area in terms of sales and marketing? You're talking about the cachet of Greenwich for downsizers, first buyers, that kind of thing. But I'm not too sure if this piece of property, in that market analysis is Greenwich and takes advantage of that cachet because it's so separate.
I think there is the draw and allure, even if you're separated from the rest of the town by an interstate highway, of being in Greenwich and having the benefit of many of the amenities we do have here, which you don't get if you're living in Westchester. And I think one of them being your taxes are a third of what you'd be paying in Westchester. But also Todd's Point and the library, which are meant for Greenwich residents. And so I think there is a particular attractiveness for people, even if you do have to drive a ways to get to the Stop and Shop.
Okay, I kind of
Have the same
understand where you're coming
problem
from.
in North Greenwich, on North Street, up near Banksville. It takes a while to get to town.
Right. And Banksville has its own lack of a better word, it's kind of north-facing commercial center. If I'm living on the Ave up there, I'm going to be running into Armonk or just that small area there to do some grocery shopping if I would. I don't know if I'd actually be tooling all the way down North Street to go grab a 6-pack of beer kind of thing.
Yeah,
but I understand where
well,
you're coming from in terms of the market, but I still would be, it's a kind of an interesting concept that was actually taken as part of Greenwich, even though it's so separate. So.
Yeah, I think people are going to look at this because it is in Greenwich. And that was part of what I think the marketing study summary was really trying to get at. There will be, I suspect, people with children coming in, and this would be going to Parkway School. along and then to Western. So I did review that with the school system. And Parkway currently has a great deal of capacity at the elementary level.
So Parkway, Western or Central? I guess it's Western, and then
Western,
Greenwich High
it's
School.
Western.
That's
Yep.
a heck of a bus ride.
I think it's the same bus ride you have if you're living in Banksville, maybe longer from Banksville.
Hmm.
Going to the high school.
Okay.
Okay.
I see
So
Ms.
it-
Jenkins has her hand up, Madam
Mm,
Chair.
I cannot see that, so thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Hegney.
Thank you, Mr. Hegney. I just want to comment, kind of seconding what Nick said. I worked in the Greenwich American Center for about 2 years. And it was a very considerable distance to get to anything in Greenwich. And of course, everybody hops over to North Castle or Armonk instead. So my question would be, of course, the schools and the amenities and everything, but in terms of going for a quart of milk, you're not going to go into Greenwich. You're going to go to North Castle for that one. Madam Chair, may I ask a question about the operation of the Greenwich American Center
Sure,
as part of this?
see what it is.
It's a large building. I assume it's fully tenanted. Is there any estimate of how many employees travel in and out of this particular area to work there during the work week?
I don't have those kinds of statistics, but I can certainly ask my client for them. And
I'm kind of
obviously,
curious.
you know, it's a very large building.
Yes, as I recall, and it was at the time very empty when I worked in it. I'm just curious as to how the commercial traffic relating to that tenancy is going to either affect the residences or the residences would affect the tenant. I'm just trying to get the bigger picture because it's like there's this big white elephant in the middle of the development, obviously, and there's going to be good and bad things involved with that.
That was something that we initially had discussed with Mr. Adler, who did not, he saw these as more complementary because they're obviously going in different directions in the morning and in the evening. So he saw it more as complementary rather than as a conflict.
And
So,
isn't
but
part
as
of,
we get into the site plan, we'll certainly be going over that again.
and hasn't it been a challenge to keep it occupied?
Um,
Well-
I know it was when I was on the commission
Okay.
back in the early 90s, which prompted the appeal to the Supreme Court. But
And
I
didn't- I mean,
don't know if
the
that has
last-
been the case recently.
Okay, I just have a memory of them coming in several times to us, maybe not several, but at least 2 times to us and talking about having to expand what they were doing. One of them is that they now have that area for the servers, that they host servers there because they couldn't get office occupancy. And so there's a major area for servers. And there was another use that they added at one point in order to increase occupancy. But I think the issue just comes back to the traffic and what happens, how burdened is the site is really what I believe Ms. Jenkins is asking, and how burdened is it? And to your point, Mr. Hegney, at what times of day and all of that, what's the, how intense is the use? Okay, anything else, folks? Since we're approaching, the 1 hour dinner break.
So that's
Wow. It was a 2-hour dinner break, but
Yeah.
2 hour.
It was
And
Mr. Hagney, you had the 4 points. That was maybe A and B, the concept, the floor area height and proposed setbacks, or did we not get into B yet?
B is much more specific in terms of the overall site plan. I really wanted to discuss this concept first, and appreciate your comments on that. But if we can go into the second one, and this involves floor area, height, and setbacks, just for residential development. And perhaps Bianca, if we could go back a couple of slides to the larger version of the proposed site plan. Yeah, this one. Right here. Thanks. So currently we have the 600,000 square foot office building and approval for a 0.09 FAR. What we're proposing as part of this application is a 0.3 FAR, which is the lowest FAR in any of the other commercial zones in town. And it would permit a total of 2 million square feet on site, which would mean another 1,400,000 square feet for the residential. Is that necessary when we're at 300 units? It was when we were at 456. We might look that number could be reduced, but that was where we came in with the 0.3, was that's the lowest floor area limitation in any of the commercial zones. The second issue is height. We had the zone currently permits 45 feet in height and 3 stories, and we're proposing 50 feet and 3.5 stories. And Eric had gone over the explanation of why we were looking for that flexibility given the topography of the site. I did include in the letter that I sent to you last week the determination from the FAA that the 50 feet would not be an issue in terms of air traffic. And the last one that we're including in the proposal is a 50-foot setback. For the office building, it's a 200-foot setback with 100-foot for accessory buildings. We, as has been discussed a little while ago, the where it says sports courts, that's the Citibank complex that's just to the west between King Street and the state line. These buildings are being shown at a 50-foot setback from the property line with landscaping along the property line itself. Really, when you get right down to it, our boundaries are 684, a vacant piece owned by IBM, and this, I would say, the other crescent, so to speak, between the state line and King Street, where you have a commercial development. And we have not had conversations with anyone from Citibank, nor IBM for that matter. No, our contacts have been representatives from North Castle, the town planner in North Castle. Adam Kaufman has been our contact and has provided comment earlier on the plan. So we're looking to be able to utilize those portions of the property that are most amenable to development, and provide screening along with that, and allow for the cluster type development that Eric has on this plan. So that's our second issue that we wanted to go over with you, and all 3 of the items that we're proposing, FAR, height, stories, and setbacks, are critical for us to be able to move ahead with the project as we have presented it to you here. So that's much more specific and than what we were discussing earlier with the overall site concept.
Mr. Hegney, with the kind of taking these out of order, The floor area, I guess we can actually get to kind of a finite number on that. It's based on, you have the existing building itself, and what's proposed for the what's existing for the zone. And then I think actually, because this is so conceptual, you may have to kind of define that or refine that FAR figure to get into where we are with that. So I think we may be a little bit premature, but yes, understanding that this is a very large piece of property. There's probably a lot of latitude in the FAR on that. But so we might be able to come back and explore that a little bit later. The 50-foot setback issue, I think actually, to the south and a little bit towards the west there, you're in conservation area, so it's not such a big deal. I would suspect that actually having discussions with the conference center and IBM would be more critical, specifically the conference center, because actually right now, the back of their building looks into meadow and forested area. They might be concerned actually now that actually what's going to happen is that this forested and kind of bucolic setting for their conference center gets disrupted by the backs of townhouses. And I think if IBM may want a more of a buffer to their open space, to their land. And like I said, if this is going to be BEX 50R, that piece of property actually would be ripe for that as well. And 50 feet, they may want to be more of a setback to any development plans they have. So that the 50-foot height taken from grade plane. Okay, that's how we do it. Understanding what Mr. Zambell had mentioned in terms of the buildings with gable ends, that kind of thing, more of a residential scale. Would you consider that the maximum height, 50 feet, be to the gable peak, to the ridge? Okay, and that kind of thing. And if there's any other roof type, it would be limited to the existing 45 feet.
Mr. McRae, are you referring to like a parapet wall on a flat roof building?
Yeah, because I understand. Yeah, you've got issues with topography. I can think of actually in Greenwich Oaks, there's some issues. It's built on a cliff, and the basement down below with the garage is down 50 feet up is the the ridge of the roof, and it's quite tall, but it's built on the rock. I think if we're okay at 45 feet within the underlying zone, we're looking for another 5 feet. But I would say, is that the gable? Where are we going to actually measure that? And I want to make sure that we don't exceed what we would normally consider a residential scale on a building for this area.
If I can answer that, I think that's appropriate. We would, in terms of the gable, that's why I think we need that extra height. If we were to have a flat roof, which I don't think, I think we would want to have some sort of roof detail. If we do that with the normal sort of 4 foot above, for a parapet or mechanical screening, things above that, I think that would be appropriate. I mean, that kind of gets us into that zone anyway. Is that what you're thinking?
What I think is that, as an example, the 12-unit clusters on the severe grade, you're going to have an issue there with height. It's going to start from a grade plane, which I would say maybe it's halfway through the first floor, but I want to make sure that actually they still stay within that residential feel, 2.5, 3-story with a gable end, and we're not getting so far up where I've got 10-foot ceilings inside the building, and then now my roof deck is at 50 feet, and then I've got another gable on top of that. I really want to see what we can do about keeping these down to more of a residential scale, low 2.5-story with a gable, that kind of thing.
I think that might be a little tight on those. These are new construction, and we definitely need at least 9-foot ceilings in these. So, and there may be some of these that warrant a 10-foot, but I think if we just assume that we're gonna do some cut and fill on this. I think that's all within reason. I think we can make that, I think we can make all that work.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm good here.
On the FAR, one of the things, something just as a thought for you all, especially, it also resonated with me what Mr. Granoff said last night about sustainability. I think it makes a difference on the FAR how sustainable it is, because the more green initiatives you have, I think I at least would be more open to a higher FAR if it would had a greater level of sustainability. So that may just be something to think about. How do the rest of you react to that?
To me, when you're saying more floor area and greater sustainability, I'd like to know how that would kind of dovetail, because it would seem a larger building is less sustainable than a smaller building. Both in terms of construction cost, construction materials, heating, cooling, water use. You mean the whole 9 yards.
Well, if it's,
I would
I
have this
see your
argument with Mr. Zambell for hours about ceiling heights. The average person's, a tall person's maybe 6'6", and with a 9-foot ceiling above, although it feels great, all of the heat's stuck in that first 3 feet that's right above your head. You'll go on and on about that discussion, but it is what it is. I would say, to me, in this type of a development, the smaller units are sustainable if they're compact and very efficient. 8-foot ceilings, those kind of things, where actually it's really using the resources to the best effect,
Well,
not
yeah.
wasting them to the aesthetics of things.
Okay, that's an excellent point. I'm always going on about that for the whole reason on cathedral ceilings. But it's an excellent point that what you want is good utilization of space, but you're also talking about the kind of windows you're going to use, whether or not you've got solar, etc. What kind of heating and ventilation you have. Nick and Arn, a great deal about both of those things. So I'm just thinking, if we're hearing a lot of water conservation and Arn, what else do you want to throw in there? This is a good moment for your placeholder.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of agree with you, Madam Chair, that obviously they're coming in for an ask. And what are the mitigants that we're looking for if they're going in for height? And I would agree, one of them is sustainability. I'm just looking at the, if I have a minute, just looking at the existing VX regulations. And I think what we want to do is to beef up a number of sections on sustainability. I don't know if Bianca's able to pull up the regulations. I'm on page 935.
Well, we can all find them.
But okay, well, I'll just go. I'll read part of it. But paragraph 9 talks about the treatment of sewage treatment in a way to avoid a detrimental impact on surface and groundwater quality. So that gets to the point. We're not just talking about capacity. We're talking about what's coming out of that sewage treatment plant. And there's a lagoon there. And we know a lot of things that we weren't really worried about 50 years ago. One of them is, nitrogen. Too much nitrogen in the area causes, green algae blooms, kills off plants, is a really bad thing. So I think in an area like this, in these regulations, we're going to want to study what is the amount of pollutants that's coming out in that wastewater now, and what do they propose? What improvements do they propose? And number 3, how do those improvements compare with, your best EPA standards in terms of discharges into rivers and lakes? Because eventually this is either going to end up in the groundwater or into the rivers and streams and into Long Island Sound. So that's on the, the wastewater treatment plant. The second point, paragraph 10, is on adequate and continuous potable water. We've heard there's adequate supply, but we really want to focus on how can they reduce, what steps are they going to take to reduce the amount of water that they're going to use? And there's an opportunity to use recycled water. Number 11, let's see. Okay, let's skip another number 11. And I would add a number 12 here, which would be energy efficiency. We've got a new regulation asking for energy narratives. I would say the quality of the narratives coming back is substandard. We're not seeing modeling. So in this section, I would add section 12 that we would require this applicant to do energy modeling, and we'll pick out the statistics we want to look at, and we'll have EMAC, look at them and grade them. Number one, on an as designed basis. We also want to do it on a completed basis. We also want to do it 1 year after completion. So are they doing what they said they were going to do? And number 3, I think this would be an excellent example for this project to sign up for something called Energy Star Portfolio Manager, where there's an ongoing monitoring of their energy use. Because this is, such a large project. I would add a 13, which, might be added to 10, but I would look to conservation to come up with language on what they want in terms of, maybe we don't need all these lawns that require fertilizer, mowing, and pesticides. Maybe some can be natural grasses. I'm thinking of Pound Ridge Reservation. I don't know if you've been up there, but it's just beautiful. You've got fields of natural grasses, maybe some of that here. So that's what I'm thinking about, Madam Chair, in terms of beefing up the sustainability portion of these regulations. And the final point is, as we've talked about before, this is one-off, BEX. This is the only BEX. So I think we can apply really strong sustainability measures to this section of town that, in a sense, go beyond where we are in the rest of the town. Because in the rest of the town, we're looking at single-family homes. This is an enormous project. Those are my thoughts.
Sounds very interesting to me. Mr. Hegney, Mr. Zambell, do you have comments on that? Or my guess is you're going to want to talk to Mr. Granoff.
Well, we're certainly going to be doing some green initiatives on this. We know we have to do the narrative, and we're very, as Rich would have said, and I'm sure spoke to yesterday, green architecture, green communities, and doing what we can for the environment, despite being, in the pro-development kind of world, is very important to us. So we will cover many of those. Part of that, I would say, like the no-mow grasses and those sort of drought tolerant things. I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and because of the size of the property and using that in the right places. And as we do the landscape plans and go before ARC, we'll definitely be talking with them about that. So if whether it's codified, or not, there's going to be some dialogue on that with both you and the ARC. So I think that from the design and architecture and landscape architecture, I didn't hear anything there that sounds nothing but positive for us.
Okay, good. All right, so we would potentially codify that for this. I think it's easier if you get definitions. Okay, Mr. Hegney, how are we doing on answering your questions?
I think we're doing very well, Madam Chair. And unless there are any other comments on the zoning statistics and sustainability, I think we can go on to item 3.
Okay,
And this sort of follows what our discussion in item 2 was. The initial proposal that we submitted to you had half a dozen changes in a half a dozen sections of the regulations. And the more I was looking at it, and the more I thought about it, I thought it would be better to, in terms of codification, to have it in one place. And then I looked at how the commission handled the assisted living project over on Old Track Road.
Mhm.
And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that this makes a lot of sense. And perhaps going with an overlay zone where everything is in one place is more of an approach. And I, rather than thinking of it just as the most recent proposal on Old Track, the one I look back at is the INDRE, which is the Industrial Reuse Overlay Zone,
Okay.
which was applied
Oh, we've
to-
actually used that ever?
you
Yes.
have, and it's called Old Greenwich Gables.
Oh,
And it
that's what
was-
was used for Gables when they did,
That
when
was
the
the Old
Electrolux
Greenwich
plant.
Gables, and there was
Okay.
the old Electrolux vacuum
Okay.
cleaner plant.
Okay,
You know, when there was the Ekman Center, which
Yeah, yeah.
of course is now gone, you had a very, very large plant with access to the railroad that was no longer being used. And the question was, how can you redevelop this in a way where you're utilizing some of the facilities? So the Old Greenwich Gables is essentially built on the deck of the original Electrolux vacuum cleaner plant. And I thought it was more along the lines of that, because it was a rather unique property. Now, could it be used for other
that's what I was
properties in
thinking.
town? I'm not sure, because it had to be a factory site.
Yes,
And,
and that's always been the problem. This is, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but one of the things that makes me
Yeah.
crazy about our regulations is that we have regulations that were created for a single one-time reason. And then they're in the books forever. But exactly, go ahead. I just had to say that. I had to get it off my chest. Go ahead.
Well, that is true. That's where you see the regulation that was put in for Lions Farm that we've been talking about. And there are a number of those, and you can look through the regulations and say, oh yeah, I know why that one was developed. The one for Palmer Point, when those developments and significant developments in town that allowed for the use of office and commercial in conjunction with the residential, which is what you have with the Palmer Point development. What we were looking at here was to provide for a purpose, a location, procedure, standards, and then uses to refer to the adoption of the Housing Trust Fund. And then lastly, which dovetails into our fourth item for discussion, is how it provides for a fee in lieu, how that would be computed, and how it would be paid to the trust fund. So those are the elements of what we have put together, besides including the zoning data, which we just discussed, into this, so that it works as a cohesive zoning package or regulation for the project. So is there going to be another BEX 50R development in town? Probably not, but hasn't stopped the commission from adopting these kinds of regulations in the past. So I was looking for something that would be a better vehicle than what we had been doing when we originally proposed this to you. And so I'm, do do I continue with this development and to follow up on Mr. Wells' comments, augment it with certain criteria and standards for sustainability and site development? Or do I go back to what I initially submitted, which is tinkering with the half a dozen sections of the regulations?
I think it makes sense to do
overall.
an overlay zone. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I think because the way that it's actually written, as Mr. Hegney just kind of laid out, the first or the three sections of section 2 location, it's got to be a BEX 50 already. There's got to be an office building that's been there since 68, and it has been have to have a continuous office use since that date. There's no other piece of property in town, even the other one to the north, that has all of that. So, in a weird way, this is kind of spot zoning. It's an overlay for this one piece of property, period, because
but-
you don't, the other two, it's a 50-acre lot under the BEX. You could actually rezone something to a BEX, but those other twos, having an office use from 68 and a continuous office use since that date, is, you can't go that, you can't have it. You wouldn't have it. And I think the only other place would be maybe Greenwich Office Park, but that's actually doesn't go back to the 60s.
Yeah,
So-
except that all you have to do is lift the word BEX, and you could say, for example, if you were gonna vacate some other large piece of land that you could eventually, you never know, you could drop something, you would have a regulation that could work. You would have an overlay zone. You could define it differently. But we'd have to consider how you would do that. I do hate the one-time use things, but if there was a way that we could make it applicable for other potential, but that's may not be a bridge we can cross. So you're thinking of an overlay zone, rather than go amending different parts of the reg, and you're thinking about how you write it, what it would allow. And one of the questions we discussed about this at the briefing was whether we should work on the overlay zone first or the site plan. And what we did with the ambassador is we did the overlay zone first. So we made the rules and then they did the site, then they came in and finished the site plan to work with the rules. What do you think, Mr. Hegney?
That is the approach I would like to take. Skipping a little bit ahead in my final remarks, I was thinking that we would be, after digesting everything that we've discussed this evening, coming back to you with a preliminary site plan and any revisions to the overlay zone, asking you to give us your comments and conditions on the preliminary site plan
Mhm.
and to proceed to final, and approve a overlay zone that wouldn't apply to this site until we actually came in with the final site plan, when you would apply it to the
Right,
property.
of
But
course.
at least we would know what the standards are
Mhm.
within that overlay zone that would apply. That's really what you did with the ambassador on
That's what we did.
on Old Track Road.
Yeah, what we were likening it to yesterday on Monday was write the rules, set the context. And then as you work on the site plan, you might have to tinker with it. That was what everybody was having a little pause about, but that's okay. We did that with with how the parking was going to work at the ambassador. We rewrote the reg to get to how the parking was going to work once we saw the site plan.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments, folks, on that?
No, I think,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
go ahead, Aaron.
No, please, Nick.
Okay, I think with the regulation, I think the kind of the nuts and bolts of the R version, the BEX 50, the R is fine. I think I need to have a lot more information concerning how the payment system works, kind of in ballpark figures in terms of, as an example, a payment is made, but is a payment made every time that the unit gets turned over? You know, those kind of things. You kind of really apply it to, you have a full build out now. What happens now? What happens in the future? You know, those kind of things. So I can see, you know, is this the right way to go about this? Or is this going to be a build out? Money gets paid, then that's the end of it. How does this all work?
If I could add something to what Mr. McRae just said. Oh, do you want to take down this plan? Bianca, I don't think we really need to look at it. Okay, so if I could add something, I have a legal question for you. Mr. Hegney, I don't think fee in lieu is the correct term. Because you're not doing it, you have no mandate for affordable housing on this property. 6110 excludes BEX zone. And there's nothing else that would be, it's the only regulation we have. So you're not in lieu of offering affordable housing. I don't know what it's called legally. It's my question to you, but it's confused people who aren't on the commission what we mean when we say fee in lieu, because it's instead of affordable housing, but there is no required affordable housing here. So it's part of your, Dennis, what do you call it when somebody does a total package for the community when they do an application? You used to say that you did developments that had these. What did you call it then?
Public good?
Yeah, that's really what you're doing. You're making a contribution to the trust for the public good, if you will. But it's not in lieu because there's no mandate. If he's in lieu, as I understand it, not an attorney, so if I'm wrong, tell me. But
This language came from the RTM's adoption of the Housing Trust Fund. And that's where the phrase fee in lieu
yes,
is used. And so that's why I was working
Right,
with
okay.
that language, because
So-
it does tie into the adoption of the Housing Trust Fund.
so glad that I wrote that document. When we wrote that document, what I had in mind was that the commission could pass a regulation that allowed a fee in lieu on 6110. Okay, because y'all don't like 6110, and that was a possibility. And I thought, well, we'll keep that. And if we're still never getting inclusionary zoning applications and people aren't doing the one below market unit once you get to 4, we may want to consider a fee in lieu. Let's keep that Stanford provision in there. Stanford has a mandate for a % affordable as well, as I recall. That's why I left it in the trust documents. I meant to consider the opportunity of where there was a mandate. So then when you were calling it fee in lieu, I was like, they're not required to, they're doing a public good. If you think it flies, great, but everybody who hears you talk about this project thinks this is an 830G in which you're buying out of the 830G, and it's misleading. And then we say, no, this isn't really an affordable housing project. This is one where to do it, they're going to do this. So if you think it flies legally, I'll stand down, but it has been troubling me. So there you are.
No, I appreciate the comment.
So
I was
just think
looking
about
at
it.
I was looking at it, what it says is that the zone shall be permitted upon the payment of a fee in lieu cash contribution to the Affordable Trust Fund. Could that be wordsmith where it takes out the fee in lieu?
Yeah.
And talks about just a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund?
Yeah. That's
That
kind
way
of the thing.
it's kind of really, it's a contribution. It's not nothing. It's not something. And then it
Yeah.
actually goes on to talking about the monetary amounts.
Yeah.
So, Peter Lowe, I'm sure could probably whip this up and fix it right.
It's because it's not portable water, so he's not going to be able to fix it.
Okay.
I'm working on my wordsmithing.
Okay.
Okay,
But
so-
this point is well taken. And I had just lifted that from
Yeah.
the adoption by the RTM. because I wanted to tie it back in that
Yeah.
that this is something that we want to do. It's why why the RTM adopted the Housing Trust Fund itself. And after only 30 or something years of struggle, and this is a way of making the trust fund a player rather
so-
than
yeah.
a figurehead.
But love it. But just, I'm going to give you the inside poop, which is I have had an extensive conversation with the housing authority who were thinking that this was instead of a requirement that you provide affordability. And they believed that the price was too low, that we might be setting a price that was too low for this buyout of an affordable requirement. And, you know, I can't talk about the application to them, but I said, look, the BEX doesn't have, it's the business zone to which 6110 does not apply, and it doesn't have a mandate. So they are doing this as part of the application package. And they said they were coming to speak against this application tonight, and I see that they're not here. So I'm thinking maybe I then sent them to talk to Bob Barilak because I couldn't talk about the application. So I think their minds may now be at ease, but it's not a unique misunderstanding. So I was trying to address that as well, because you're not saying, hey, instead of providing 30%, you know, that's what I'm saying. So think about the wording. I keep wondering if, you know, we could say where a property should be classified as BEX. Might we say a business zone? I don't know, because
Certainly.
then you overlap with 6110. So I don't know, maybe you just leave it at BEX and you let us play with it and think about it.
Right. Let me think about that a little bit more, but your point about the fee in lieu is well taken.
I didn't know. I honestly didn't know the usage, the legal usage of the term, because I was stealing, as you know, from other towns wording for their trusts. But I didn't know what was correct. So at some point it would be called a right of regulation that we could use as an overlay to do some kind of denser development. There's all these regulations in this book that are one-time use and that we've never reused. Is there a possibility that we could write a reg that would work? But it might be too much of a burden for you for this application. So maybe just stick to the BEX, write it with the BEX, and then one day if we need to do another overlay, we'll take it out, dust it off, take off the word BEX and reframe it.
Yeah, and the example that I would use is the conservation cluster zone that you just approved on King Street, where we had it adopted as part of Chieftains, hadn't been used at all after Chieftains.
Exactly.
We made some modifications to
There you
it,
go.
and I think it worked very well. So I think there is the opportunity to make those changes in the future.
And in that one, you hit Nick's point right on the head. You know, Nick was saying, you know, as you recall, we reduced the overall FAR on that. And in that, our point on that was that the buildings were relatively large and therefore not consistent with the concepts of the conservation and sustainability. So that's why I was saying to you, we could see it the other way. To be intellectually consistent, or for us, we would say to you, hey, if you're more sustainable, then and maybe it's not a greater opening to the FAR, but I see it as it is because there's a lot of things you could do for sustainability, as Mr. Wells pointed out, that aren't related to the size of your units.
Mhm.
So
yeah.
I had a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
And that is sort of procedurally. So, and also to Mr. Hagney. So I guess Mr. Hagney will take a shot at reworking whether it's an overlay or the BX. I don't know, but I have a feeling that, you know, at least where I might want to go, the regulations that will have more teeth and specificity than what he might suggest. How do we work that in? Do I come up with some language, or does Mr. Hagney present it first and then we react? What's the most efficient way?
if you would be okay with this, Mr. Wells, what I would suggest is that you discuss it with Mr. LaRoe and staff, and
Yeah.
then your input go to the applicant of what you're thinking.
Okay.
Since we've got an application before us, it's hard for us to work with you on it. But if you could work with Pat,
Sure.
and I'm thinking you've got 3 great resources in our staff, Bianca, Jackie, and Marisa, who might
Right.
have thoughts. And also Beth Evans, who's the new environmental affairs director. But you could put together, they could reach out to her, and you could put together some ideas that you'd like them to consider, and then just have Pat forward it to Mr. Hegney. That
Great,
might be the
thank you.
best way to do it.
Thank you.
It's also a little bit of a factor to Nick's point again, 10-foot ceilings sell, but they're not as energy efficient. Every time I look at a net zero house, they don't have 10-foot ceilings, but they do
Particularly in
sometimes.
Vermont, right?
Yeah, so, that's, yeah, but so there are some trade-offs in there. The 50-foot height, Nick, are you okay with that? For 3.5 stories?
It's 50 feet, and understanding what Mr. Zambella is talking about in terms of grades. It's sometimes it's 50 feet makes sense because you've got high to low grade. Sometimes 50 feet would make no sense because it's relatively flat. And I think it's how do we kind of codify that to give them the latitude to
Okay.
say, I'm going from a driveway, up a garage and then 2 stories and then a roof. That's 50 feet, as opposed to on the other side, I'm only have 1 story and a roof. How does 50 feet equate to all of that? So and the devil is in the details. I would say 50 feet if you've got a severe slope, but if we can keep these down as more of a residential scale on all sides, that would be best.
And then, of course, we said it to you on a different application, Mr. Hegney. State statute requires the chargers, the EV chargers, so you would have them. My sense is your parking numbers, you might want to just think about putting in some kind of parking ratio. A couple of applicants have mentioned that they think about parking ratios when they build, and this being a remote enough property, you may want to just consider what is an appropriate. You have one parking space per unit is what is in your table.
I think we have quite a bit more than that, actually.
Yeah, but you're saying the required parking
The
is one.
required, well,
And
and
so
we're taking that from the regulation that says if you have a mixed use development, you have 1
Yeah.
parking space required for each residential unit, but actually we're showing 636 parking
636.
spaces. So we're
Right.
a little over
Right,
2 times
Right.
each unit.
so that was just, but you might want to specify that what the requirements should be. I'm not seeing it in here. Or
No, I
refer,
didn't
or
put
just
something in, but
refer
I
to the
certainly can
requirements.
add that. Yeah, I can certainly add that.
Because, yeah, I think about whether you want to just refer to the mixed use requirements or not.
Given the amount of parking that we're looking to provide here and
Yeah.
not have it utilize the parking that is in the existing commercial building, we're probably going to keep this kind of a ratio of essentially a 2 to 1.
Yeah, I believe he's going to correct me in an email, I'm sure, because he's listening, but yeah, sometimes I know there's somebody who says 1.6. So you could look at that. I think that the problem is that you're remote enough here, you can't really expect anybody to take public transit.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yeah, it's different if
that's-
we're right next to the train station. I think
Right.
then we can make more of an argument to that effect.
Or right by King Street. And your client has another application coming in that's closer to downtown. Any other thoughts on the zoning? And so Arn's gonna send comments. I don't really have any other thoughts. I don't, does any, the 0.3 seems reasonable to me for what we're doing. But I don't have a conceptual structure to justify that. Does that make sense? I don't have a way of rationalizing it.
Yeah, because I think we're in such a concept now.
Mhm.
You know, what would, you know, does 0.3 look like what we're seeing in the concept, or, you know, at what point would we actually see what the real floor area pans out to be looking like? And I think that's the kind of thing. At the moment, it's fine, but you know, what's it really going to look like when we get a little bit more into the weeds?
Right. Okay. I like that answer. You left yourself wiggle room. You said yes, but then you left yourself an escape hatch. That was very lawyer-like.
I'm not a
must be
lawyer,
having
but
a
I do
bad
play one on
influence on 'em.
TV.
You play one on TV. Okay, so did that hit all 4 questions? See, I've lost track.
The only thing is,
No.
it's the contribution, and I'm kind of
That-
step by step want to kind of go through that.
If
Okay.
we could, that's number 4, and in the 15 minutes I hope we have left,
We might
so,
reprieve you.
I'd like to go through that, and just to give you a little bit of background. When we came to you in July, you said, go talk to the trust fund and come back to us. And so we did that, and we did that quite often over the last 5-6 months. My client prepared an analysis of how affordable housing projects could be funded and constructed. The Housing Trust Fund members did the same. We were very, very far apart when we started this discussion. We were at $55,000, and Mr. Barilak in his analysis was at $250,000. Doing it in several ways with several different kinds of projects, and you see that in the letter that you received at the end of last month, that it was looking at several different ways you could develop affordable housing and what the costs would be for each of those, and then how that related to what we were offering as the contribution, as I will now start saying.
Well, if you think it's the legally right
and-
word, I don't know.
I think contribution is a good word, rather than in lieu, because as you said, there is no requirement here for affordable housing. So we came up about 5 times from what we initially started with. And at this point, I think we're much closer. We're not there yet. The letter that you received from Mr. Barilak is talking about 20%, that the payment would be based on 20% of the total units. Our proposal and the regulation that we were just talking about is 15%, but we are at the 250,000. We had discussed with trust fund members that this would be not paid initially, but be paid in increments. And except for looking at the percentages of how much gets paid at each stage. For example, Mr. Barilak's letter refers to 60% at the time building permit is issued. We were thinking maybe a little bit less then, because that's not when that's when we're going to need the money, not when we're getting the money, and that more be tied in with the actual sale of the units. And to address Mr. McRae's comment from earlier, one of our earlier versions of this was that it would be a recurring, essentially, conveyance tax, and we had a 0.5% conveyance tax that would occur every time one of these units sold, not just the initial sale. That's not how we have worded this. And that's primarily because we're dealing with a much larger number for the units, and also because this is when income will be generated by the construction and sale of units. Whereas I think having it as a recurring tax or payment at the time each unit is sold in the future is going to have a detrimental effect on the value of the units themselves. So that's why we drifted away from the 0.5% conveyance tax and are working now with a payment of a fee or contribution that is bigger but done at one time, not on a recurring basis.
So that initial contribution, 250,000 times 15% of the residential units sold, which is 309 units.
Yes, 309
Okay.
is what we have proposed
Okay,
now.
so that's the big number. That's the total contribution. And then it'll be paid out based on when we, as the commission, if we actually approve it, there's 450. And then when building permits are issued, there'll be, I guess it's 55 buildings, so you're gonna have 55 permits. There's a specific number or unit cash unit there, multiplied by 15%. That's the second payment. And then the third payment, and this is the one that's continuing, would be anytime they're sold again, or excuse me, I guess it would be resold. Is that would be
No.
number 3?
Number 3 would be when the initial construction of the unit is being sold as a new dwelling unit. That's when you would have the remainder of the $250,000 contribution paid, but not that there would be $250,000 paid every time you sell the units.
Right. Okay. So
Not that I haven't had conveyance taxes of $250,000.
Right.
But the houses are worth a lot more than what we're looking at here.
Mhm. Okay, so it's that 250 times 15% of the 309. That's the big number, and then you whittle it down to three payment points: approval, permit, and then sale.
Correct.
Okay. Now, where I just want to make sure I understand this. When they are resold, is there another payment made? Or once it's sold initially, that's it?
It's when they're sold initially, that would be the sole payment that would be due.
Okay, okay. Would it be, I don't know, for me, it might be, would it be beneficial to see how this would play out? Based on just, I say a number, you're talking about now here conceptually 55 buildings, 309 units. We actually play this out in terms of a chart or a way of actually seeing how this would work in terms of, total lump sum figures? Would that be appropriate at this time?
We can certainly create a chart like that.
Okay. Well, even if it's fictitious, so we're not really getting to the numbers, because I'd like to see how this would work in terms of the numbers themselves. I could run this through with what is here with the 55 buildings, so on and so forth, but I would like to see how that would work, because now it starts to make sense in terms of this is what the benefit is in terms of this part of the regulation overall. We're going to be getting a certain amount of contribution over the course of a certain amount of time for the construction of things. Because I think actually a lot of people may, not just the commission itself, I think maybe a lot of the residents may want to know, what, you know, how is this a real benefit to the town itself in terms of a contribution to the housing trust?
Certainly.
A different comment would be, when you write the BEX, it never occurred to us that this business zone would ever have housing. So 6110 excludes it. What if you just put into the BEX overlay zone, you put in a mandate to have below market, you know, housing, and give yourself an option to buy out of it. So that's a possibility to write it. You know, of course, I like Mr. Barilak's 20%. You know, why not? Oh, I've been assuming that you and the trust would work that out. That would be that the trust would come to us and let us know if they had reached an agreement with you.
And as I said earlier, Madam Chair, we have had many discussions, and I would say very constructive, informed. It's not just Mr. Barilak on the Housing Trust Fund that is skilled in these matters. He has a lot of assistance in that, and we have come to appreciate that, and they share how they get to where they're going, and we've shared that as well. So I think it's been a very effective give and take, and we're closer, is what I'd like to say. So much closer.
Okay.
But
So-
there's, before we come back to you,
You're gonna hammer it out. Yeah, you're gonna figure it out.
we will get to that point. Yes.
And so it's either a public good contribution or you write yourself a mandate and then you do a fee in lieu. Either way.
So certainly things to think about. Yes.
Mr. Barilak, on behalf of the trust, he's wearing that hat while he's here. Did you want to add anything to the discussion of the contribution? And
No, I'm here to respond to any questions the commission has, but this is entirely a commission decision, which, as I said, I am stepping back from. I can respond to any questions the commission has, but that probably best I should be respond rather than articulate things.
anybody have questions?
Bob, I assume the 250,000 matches up with your estimated cost to construct affordable housing. And is that a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or how did you come up with that number?
I'll describe briefly what that is. The letter tries, but it's dense and I know it's hard to parse. What we did was we took a real honest to goodness pro forma for an actual hypothetical, but very, very real construction of 100% affordable building, and put real costs on it. And then asked ourselves, how much money could the developer raise from two sources that are relatively available: debt financing and low-income housing tax credits. That left a ginormous gap. And the debate that we had, the conversation we had with Mr. Hegney's clients, who I must say were extraordinarily professional in all these conversations. Very pleasure to work with them. Was how much of that gap could potentially be filled by other sources in a reliable way, not a contribution. The trust position was zero, that none of these other potential sources, funds from CHAFA, funds from the Department of Housing, funds from foundations, or funds from the National Housing Trust Fund, all of those were so hotly contested, so sought after every year, that our position should be that this applicant should fill that entire gap. And that was the $250,000. It will cost more than $250,000 per unit to develop, but this is what we think that the applicant should provide, and position whomever or wherever would build these units to have that money be enough, together with mortgage and tax credits, to get the job done.
Thank you.
That's actually, it's fantastic question, Mr. Wells, because it was exactly what the Housing Authority, the Greenwich Communities had a thought that Mr. Barilak was thinking in terms of total construction costs. And in fact, he was looking at the gap, the financing gap. And that, I guess that clarified it for them. And since they're not here, but they weren't alone in that. So there you are. Okay, so you're gonna draft. I would love to have you flesh out just the overlay zone and just come back to us with that. So we can.
Yeah, we
I
we
feel
will
like we're
certainly
moving
work with staff
slowly.
with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's been it's taken a long time to get to where we are. I think it can now move ahead
Mhm.
based on the discussion we've had and these 4 points. I know that we have to analyze sewer and potable water capacity and use. We need to provide an actual site plan. We need to quantify where the wetlands are and how they're how we work with them. So our plan is to continue to work on the overlay zone with the staff, come back to you sometime in the spring with a preliminary site plan that does have the actual grading on it. And then we can be looking at what the heights are that are needed, the number of stories, and how we address some of the other comments that we had earlier on the concept site plan that we discussed this evening. So that's our plan.
Uh, you know, okay, so last thing, I'm still struggling a little bit of the single use. Say, for example, I'm just making this up, I'm not anticipating it, but say something like Nathaniel Witherall closed, relatively intense use on a place. And you were thinking of what you were going to do with that property. And you wanted to use this overlay zone. You have this nursing facility, it's got a lot of units. And could you have this regulation potentially work for something like that? I'm just thinking out loud that it could, because you've already got a usage density on site, which you don't here. So that would be different, but the Witherall is in a location where the traffic is relatively bad.
Yeah,
So different.
I think it's along the lines of the example I gave earlier with the new project that you just approved on King Street. I think you look to make minor modifications to
Mhm.
work with a different site, and I think that's the better approach with it.
I think what would happen is that you're kind of keyholing to this site based on the existing conditions. So if, for example, one of the clubs gave it all up, you had 50 acres, you'd have to go back and actually say, well, then it's 50 acres, so that's the BEX. But we'd have to talk about actually office use, which it didn't have. So in a sense, then you're talking about now it's not a BEX 50, it's a large acreage overlay zone for a club, and it'd have to be modified that way. I think that's the kind of thing is that each site would be very different. You probably get back into that same condition of now it's a club use overlay zone, that kind of thing. So you're building instead of 18 holes, it's 9 holes with townhouses in amongst it or something. I think as a BEX or a business zone, you'd be kind of hard pressed to find enough land to kind of
Yep.
create this again.
I know, but on the other hand, you never know, things have always surprised us. Okay, so before we wrap up, does anybody from the public wish to make a comment? I think we kind of bored them because people went away. Does anybody from the public wish to comment? Please raise your virtual hand if you want to make a comment. Ryan Brumberg. Okay, anybody else who wishes to speak after Mr. Brumberg, please raise your virtual hand. Mr. Brumberg, if you would unmute.
And also, if you're on the phone, it's *9 to
No,
raise your hand.
he's
Madam
not.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
is this working?
This is working. No, he's not on the phone. If you only see a
No,
phone number, oh
there's
yeah,
one
Yep.
phone number, yeah.
you were way ahead of me. Okay, so *9, phone number ending in 9711, *9 if you wish to raise your hand and speak. Mr. Brumberg, if you would kindly go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much. You guys work incredibly hard. I've listened to a couple meetings and I'm always amazed.
We're
I
crazy.
just
It's
had
all
a-
right.
I just had a couple questions, and maybe these are for the board and maybe these are for Mr. Hegney.
Well, you have to
My-
ask us no matter what. So, and then
Oh,
we'll,
well, I'll
we'll
ask
look
you
at,
then.
we'll look
Apologies.
at Mr. Hegney and we'll say, so Mr. Hegney, would you answer that? Go ahead, sir.
So I guess my question was just around, has anybody done a cost benefit analysis in terms of this development and the effects it would have on the Greenwich school system and the fire and police, especially because it's so far away from many of the other features of the town?
No, yes, there's going to be, it's a yes and no to this. First of all, we don't approve anything without getting sign off from the public services. Second, in terms of the schools, we as a town, if we approve something, the Board of Ed is supposed to educate the children. It has not been the zoning practice in Connecticut to look at cost benefit in terms of infrastructure impact of an application. People have talked about it. It's a fascinating idea and people have discussed it over time. In fact, Mr. Hegney knows a lot about that because he has extensive land use background, but it's been discussed. You are developing a community and every application burdens the infrastructure. Should the applicants pick up a greater portion of that? But it has not been a zoning practice. So we don't look by statute, we don't look at economics and we don't look at incremental burden on the infrastructure. All we do is get a sign off from a department as to whether or not they can handle the project today, right now. But whether it's going to lay the path for a straw that breaks the camel's back is not something that's ever looked at. But the sewer department, when it's sewer or water or whatever, everybody signs off, Aquarian signs off that they can service a development, et cetera. Does that answer your question?
It does mostly, so thank you. I hadn't realized that was not an area that could be considered under statute, I guess. I guess my only other part of the question was, is there a reason that the town needs to approve something like this as opposed to say not? And I'm not saying we shouldn't, because
No,
it seems
so
like a
let me
maybe nice
answer it.
development.
Let me give you it's a reverse answer. The town writes a 10-year plan of development, conservation and development. Under the guidance of that plan, it writes the zoning regulation. Once it has written those zoning regulations, unless an applicant has violated the zoning regulations, we are legally not supposed to deny an application. There is a little fudgy area, gray areas where it's a subjective call whether the zoning regulations have been met. But generally, the zoning regulations establish the right of the applicant. And once that right is established, we can't say, oh no, we don't like that house, you can't have it, as long as they've met the zoning regulations. So we are bound, and we're bound by state statute and all of that. All the powers we have are delegated to us by state statute. So we're very different from wetlands is like us. They are created, they follow a state set of principles. Mr. Hegney, I'm going to ask you, because I know you were on the Planning and Zoning Commission, I'm just going to ask if you have anything philosophical to add to my answer.
I agree. You need to look at what the Plan of Conservation and Development has given you as a guideline, and you look to provide for housing opportunities and other support within the community, and that I think that's why we're bringing this to you.
But you're asking a brilliant question, Mr. Brumberg, because I spent my first few months on the Planning and Zoning Commission not understanding why they didn't just say no to stuff I hated. And I was on the commission by then and I didn't understand. They couldn't say no. And finally, somebody sat me down and said, look, just because you don't like it, we can't say no. It's gotta be out of line with the regulations. If the regulations are allowing something to happen that we hate, then we revise the regulations. So to give you an example, we no longer allow multifamily development in the R6 because because there was so much complaint about that in town. So we changed the regulations, but it has to be the regulation. Okay, what else?
I'll just finish up my question by asking, does that mean that there's a risk that other places, let's say in R4 or R2, somebody could come in 5 or 10 years and say, hey, I have 15 acres here. I want to put up 100 houses. I understand they can't under the current zoning, but the BEX 50 or whatever the current area for the Greenwich American Center also does not allow for residential housing like this. So
Mhm.
when somebody comes and asks for a change in zoning, my question is, the board, again, as long as they've been compliant in the past, has to generally say yes. Is that right?
Yes. Well, when somebody wants a change in the zoning, we have to go to our plan of conservation and development, our 10-year plan, and we have to decide if the change in zoning is consistent with what the plan says. The second highest priority in our plan of conservation and development, the first one is to create community, to protect community character. That is the most important mandate we have. The second priority we have in that plan is to have housing options for people. And so you heard me pressing over and over again, are you creating options for young families? Because what we see is we don't have enough downsize options for Greenwich residents, and we don't have enough options for younger families. The kind of place, that you can buy when you're 30 and you're starting a family. So that is in our plan of conservation and development, and the zoning change would, in our minds, have to conform with that plan of conservation and development. We have denied things that were in the plan of conservation, things that we thought were in zoning changes that were inconsistent with the plan of conservation and development. That we can do because we have that structure and we say, no, this didn't work. And in fact, denial about which the town was very mixed, and I can't talk about it because it's in litigation, was Greenwich Hospital wanted to do a cancer center, and we didn't feel that that was consistent with the plan of conservation and development.
Madam Chair, thank you. And I can't thank you for denying the Cancer Center because it's in litigation, but you guys do very
Don't
good
say
work.
anything.
Thank you.
Don't say anything. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Brumberg. Feel free to write us with whatever thoughts you have. All right, okay. Our next speaker, I knew he was going to probably jump in and correct me, is Mr. Pecora, and then we don't have anybody else. Mr. Pecora, if you would unmute.
Yeah, a multi-pronged statement questions.
Okay.
One, I thought I heard you say that this is the only BEX property in the BEX zone.
Two, there's two really.
Okay. Can this property or something similar to what is being presented be approved in this underlying zone without Connecticut General Statute 8-30G or spot zoning?
Yeah, so two answers to that. The first one is 830G doesn't say anytime you build something, you have to make it affordable. 830G, as you know, just says you have to get to the 10%. We want you to, it even says, it just says we want, you got to be at 10% or the appeals process. You know that better than I do. So there is no mandate that this be affordable. That was the point. This is not spot zoning because we're going to do an overlay zone for where the BEX zone itself is being modified with an overlay, and that makes it not be spot zoning. We'll run that by Mr. Wetmore one more time before we move forward. But in this spot zoning is normally going to be we changed the zoning for my next door neighbor, but I can't do what she's doing. That's a better example of spot zoning. This is you're taking the whole zone and you're doing an overlay for it. And the other place we did it was we did it for the ambassador. And we've got, the HO is an overlay zone, for example, and that's not spot zoning.
So the only way to get this approved as presented would be either an overlay zone, or if,
Yeah.
or if they could, or if they came in with 830G and showed that everything else is hunky-dory, you could approve it.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And also, Mr. Pecora, because we never imagined when we wrote 6110 that the BEX, being one of the business zones, should be covered by it because it was only an office use. And so 6110, the inclusionary zoning reg, you know, that's moderate income and all that, it doesn't have anything in it. So the only way they could get to this, but it's an interesting idea. And what I was thinking about was, could we find a way of using it again if this overlay zone worked? The other place we used it exactly, do you remember sitting in for the ambassador?
Yes.
Okay, so the ambassador is an overlay. Think about the fact that you create, we enabled people to create assisted living in the same underlying zone in other parts of town. I'm starting to bore the commission. This is when I get zoning geeky.
So with the overlay and the underlying zone, this would comply in every respect.
Yeah, that's how we're gonna do it. And you know, we won't move without Mr. Wetmore.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pecora. Okay, I don't see anybody else with a hand up. The phone went away. I think Peter Alexander was having a hard time raising his hand or something, so he'll send us an email. All right. Do you want to wrap up with anything, Mr. Hagney?
I want again to thank you for setting this up. I think this has been as constructive a commission meeting as I think I have participated in a long time.
It's so nice when you
I-
don't, when you know you don't have 12 other things waiting for you to decide them.
Yes, or I have 12 other things on the agenda that evening.
Yeah.
Yes. But you've given us a lot of comments that are very helpful in terms of putting this together so that we can come to you with an honest to goodness site plan and a regulation that I think will work for this, if not for other properties, at least for this. And it will be something that that you can support. So again, thanks for setting this up. This was really good.
All right. Over and out.
Thank you.
You get 3 hours for
Thanks,
dinner,
everyone.
guys. Bye.